Billionaire's car broke down. Near a diner, he met the waitress who changed his life. Have you ever met someone who reminded you what it meant to simply be alive? Not because they gave you something grand, but because they saw you, the person behind everything you were trying to hide. That was the day billionaire Marcus Blake's life quietly began to change, though he didn't know it yet. The sun hung low over the empty highway, casting a pale gold glare across the hood of a sleek black Mercedes. The car hissed, then groaned, the sound of money meeting bad luck. Marcus Blake cursed under his breath and pulled over to the shoulder. Steam rose from under the hood like the last straw in a bad day. He stepped out, phone in hand, custom suit still crisp despite the heat. His tie hung loose, his temper tighter. The engine light had blinked for miles, but he'd ignored it, like he ignored everything that didn't fit his schedule. Now here he was, a billionaire stranded on a quiet rural road that barely had cell service. He raised his phone, walking a few steps for a signal. Nothing. Not even a single bar. A truck roared past, shaking dust over his polished shoes. He muttered something sharp and looked down the road. In the far distance, he spotted a faded sign that read, "Maggie's Diner, 1 mile ahead." He sighed, locked the car, and started walking. By the time he reached the diner, the sun was bleeding into the horizon. The place looked like it had been built in the 50s and never updated. Chipped paint, neon open sign flickering, a rusted pickup parked out front. Marcus paused. At the door, eyeing the reflection of his tired face in the glass. He looked like a man out of place, and he hated that feeling. Inside, the smell of coffee and baked pie filled the air. A bell jingled when he stepped in. There were 3 customers, 2 old men in flannel talking softly, and a young mother feeding her toddler in the corner booth. Behind the counter stood a waitress wiping down a tray, a woman in her late 20s with light brown hair tied loosely behind her, an old-fashioned name tag that read, Emma. She looked up with a small smile. "Evening. You look like you've had a day." Marcus blinked, thrown off by her easy tone. "My car broke down, somewhere up that road." He pointed vaguely over his shoulder. "Is there a mechanic nearby?" "Not for a few miles," she said, setting down the tray. "But I can call Hank. He runs a little shop behind the feed store. He's slow, but honest." Marcus checked his phone again. Still no signal. "That'll do. Can you tell him it's a black Mercedes?" Emma chuckled softly, interrupting. "You'll see it. It's the only black Mercedes for 50 miles. He looked at her, unsure if she was teasing him or just being kind. Her smile didn't waver. "Sit down," she said. "You look like you could use something cold. Coffee or lemonade?" He hesitated. "Just water." She nodded and walked away, her steps light but unhurried. Marcus sat in the nearest booth, glancing around. Everything about the place felt old. The chrome counter, the faded pictures on the wall, the hum of an old jukebox in the corner. It was nothing like the sterile, expensive restaurants he lived in, but somehow the silence here didn't feel empty. Emma returned with a glass of water and a slice of apple pie. "On the house. My mom's recipe." "I didn't order that," Marcus said flatly. "I know," she replied, "but it's hard to stay mad when you're eating something warm." He opened his mouth to refuse, but the smell stopped him. The crust was golden and flaky, the filling still warm. Against his better judgment, he took a small bite. And for the first time in a long time, something simple made him pause. It tasted like a memory. She leaned against the counter, watching him with curious eyes. "You passing through or lost?" "Neither," he said after swallowing. "Business trip. I was supposed to be in a meeting an hour ago." She raised an eyebrow. "Guess life had other plans." He looked up sharply. "You sound like you think that's a good thing." Emma smiled faintly. "Sometimes it is. Sometimes we're meant to stop for a reason." He wanted to argue. Marcus Blake never stopped for any reason that wasn't profitable. But her tone wasn't preachy. It was matter of fact, calm, like she wasn't trying to teach him anything at all. She picked up the coffee pot and started refilling cups at another table, leaving him with his thoughts. He found himself watching her move, noticing how easily she talked to people, how the old men laughed, how the young mother smiled when Emma brought her an extra napkin without asking. It wasn't performance, it was presence. Minutes passed before a tall man in grease-stained coveralls came through the door. "Emma, you said somebody's car broke down?" She pointed toward Marcus. "Right there, black Mercedes up by mile marker 6. Hank nodded, tugged his cap, and said, "I'll go take a look." Then to Marcus, "You got the keys?" Marcus handed them over. "It overheated. I'll pay whatever it costs." Hank just shrugged. "We'll see what we can do." When the door shut behind him, Emma looked back at Marcus. "He'll call when he's done. Might be a while, though. You hungry for dinner?" "I'll just wait here." She tilted her head slightly. "You'll be waiting for at least an hour. You might as well eat something." He sighed, defeated. "Fine. What do you recommend?" "The special. Chicken pot pie and a slice of lemon cake. Comfort on a plate." He nodded reluctantly, and she smiled like she'd just won a small victory. She disappeared into the kitchen, and Marcus leaned back, staring out the window. The highway stretched far into the dark, endless and empty. He'd spent his life building towers of glass and steel. But right now, he was surrounded by the simplest things, and somehow it didn't feel like punishment. Emma returned with his plate, the scent of warm pastry and herbs drifting up. "Careful, it's hot," she said, setting it down. "You look like someone who eats out of boxes." He raised an eyebrow. "What makes you say that?" "Because you eat like you're on a schedule," she said softly. "Like you're always late for something." Her words hit closer than she could have known. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. "You talk like you know people." "I just watch," she said, wiping the counter. "People tell you everything without saying much." He looked at her for a long second, the kind of look that wasn't romantic, just curious. "And what do you see when you look at me?" She smiled faintly. "A man who hasn't rested in a long time." Marcus almost laughed, but the sound caught in his throat. He picked up his fork instead, avoiding her eyes. Outside, the light faded to deep blue. Somewhere down the road, crickets began to sing. Inside, the diner glowed softly, like a small world apart from his own. Halfway through his meal, rain began to fall. Light at first, then heavier. The sound of it against the windows filled the quiet room. Emma walked over with a towel in her hand. "If you're heading out after, take this," she said. "You'll need it." He frowned. "You don't even know me." She shrugged. "Don't have to. Kindness doesn't need a reason." He looked up at her, really looked this time. The warmth in her voice wasn't pity. It was something simpler, the kind of humanity he'd forgotten existed. Just then, his phone buzzed faintly, a weak signal. A message blinked from his assistant. "Meeting canceled. Storm delay." He stared at it for a moment, then put the phone down. For once, he didn't feel the urge to respond. Emma noticed the quiet and poured him another glass of water. "Bad news?" He shook his head. "Maybe the opposite." For a moment, their eyes met, hers open and unguarded, his trying to remember how to be that way. And for the first time in years, Marcus Blake smiled. The rain outside softened. The hum of the diner wrapped around them like a small secret. She moved closer to the window, watching the road shimmer under the headlights of passing trucks. She said quietly, "You know, storms can be good for the ground. They bring things back to life." Marcus looked at her reflection beside his own in the glass. "Maybe for more than the ground." Before she could answer, Hank came back through the door, shaking off rain. "Got it cooled down, but the radiator's got a crack," he said. "I'll need to fix it in the morning." Marcus blinked. "You mean I'm stuck here tonight?" Hank nodded. "Afraid so. Closest motel's 10 miles that way." He pointed down the road. Marcus glanced at Emma. She hesitated, then spoke up. "There's an old spare room out back. We used to rent it out to truckers. It's nothing fancy, but it's dry." He hesitated, pride warring with practicality. "I'll pay," she interrupted gently. "You don't have to." He met her eyes again. This time something softened between them. "Thank you." Emma smiled. "Come on, I'll show you where it is." She grabbed an umbrella from behind the counter, opened it, and stepped outside. He followed her into the rain, the soft light from the diner spilling across the puddles. The umbrella barely covered them both, and for a brief second, Marcus felt something he hadn't in years. Small, but safe. She led him around back toward the little side building, wooden steps creaking under their feet. The rain pattered softly against the umbrella. She stopped at the door and handed him the handle. "Here," she said. "You keep this for now. You'll need it more than me." He took it reluctantly. "You'll get wet," she smiled, rain catching in her hair. "I don't mind." Before he could say anything else, she turned back toward the diner, her red waistcoat bright against the gray night. Marcus stood there for a long time, watching her go. A man who had everything, realizing how little he'd ever really seen. He opened the door and stepped inside the small room. The small back room behind the diner looked like it hadn't changed in decades. A narrow bed, a dresser with a cracked mirror, and faded wallpaper with tiny flowers curling at the edges. Marcus stood in the doorway for a long minute, umbrella dripping onto the worn floorboards. He'd slept in penthouses with marble walls, flown in jets with silk bedding. But this quiet space, smelling faintly of lemon cleaner and old coffee, felt more human than any of them. He set his jacket on the chair and checked his phone again. No service. His assistant, his driver, his world, all unreachable. He almost felt relief. The rain outside softened to a steady rhythm. Somewhere in the distance he heard Emma laughing with Hank as they locked up the diner for the night. Her laughter carried through the rain like a small spark of life in the dark. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his reflection in the cracked mirror. Without the city lights, without the mask of power, he just looked tired, maybe even lonely. A soft knock came at the door. "Come in," he said, expecting Hank, but it was Emma, holding a tray. Steam rose from a mug and a bowl on it. "Didn't know if you had dinner earlier," she said. "So I brought some soup. Chicken and corn, my mom's recipe." He frowned lightly. "You didn't have to do that," she smiled. "I didn't, but you looked like you needed it." He stood, unsure how to respond. No one spoke to him like that, not without wanting something. She set the tray down and looked around the room. "Haven't been in here in years. We used to let travelers stay when the storms hit. Most people don't stop anymore." "Guess I'm the unlucky exception," he said with a faint grin. "Or the lucky one," she countered. "Depends how you see it." She turned to go, but paused. "If you need anything, I'll be around. Power might flicker if the storm picks up, but the lantern works." She gestured to an old oil lamp on the nightstand. Marcus nodded. "Thanks, Emma," she smiled. "Good night, stranger." When she left, the door clicked softly behind her. Marcus sat again, staring at the steaming bowl. It wasn't fancy, but it was real. He took a spoonful, and warmth spread through him, not from the soup, but from something deeper. Maybe it was the first time in years he'd eaten food made with care, not calculation. Hours passed. The storm eased, and the sound of crickets returned. He lay back trying to sleep, but his mind refused to quiet. Images flickered. Boardrooms, arguments, headlines about his divorce, numbers on screens. Then her face, calm, kind, and untouched by all of it. By morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains, warm and soft. Marcus woke to the sound of clinking dishes and faint humming coming from the diner. He got up, splashed water on his face, and caught his reflection again. He didn't look like the man from the city. His hair was slightly messy, his shirt wrinkled, and somehow it suited him. When he walked into the diner, Emma was already there, refilling salt shakers and humming to a song on the radio. The place smelled like coffee and fresh biscuits. She looked up as he entered. "Morning," she said with that same easy smile. "Sleep all right?" He nodded. "Better than expected. That's rare praise around here," she said, laughing softly. "Coffee?" "Please." She poured him a cup and slid a plate of scrambled eggs and toast his way. "Breakfast special." "Don't worry, it's on the house again." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You keep doing that and this place won't make a profit." Emma leaned on the counter. "Oh, I'm not the owner. Just the dreamer." He looked up. "You mean you want to buy it?" "One day," she said, eyes soft. "It's been my home since I was 16. Maggie, the owner, she's more like family. But she's been thinking about retiring. If I can save enough, maybe she'll sell it to me." He sipped his coffee, watching her. "You really think it's worth it?" A place like this? She smiled, glancing around at the old booths, the sunlight on the counter. It's not about worth. It's about heart. This place feeds people who can't pay sometimes. Gives travelers a bit of warmth on bad days. That's worth more than any number. He didn't respond. He just looked at her. Really looked. Every word she said seemed foreign and familiar all at once. She was talking about something money could never buy, and he realized he'd forgotten what that felt like. After a moment, he said quietly, "You're not like most people." Emma tilted her head. I could say the same. A few minutes later, Hank came in, wiping his hands on a rag. "Got your car fixed, Mr. Blake. She's running smooth now." Marcus stood, fishing for his wallet. "How much do I owe?" Hank shook his head. "Emma already covered your breakfast. I figure you can settle for the repairs." Emma cut in quickly. "He doesn't have to." Marcus stopped her gently. "No, let me." He handed Hank his black card. Hank chuckled. "That's a fancy piece of plastic." "I'll take cash if you got it." Marcus blinked, then smiled faintly. "Right." He pulled out a few bills from his wallet, something he rarely did. "Keep the change." Hank nodded his thanks and left with a wave. Emma lingered by the counter, wiping a mug that didn't need wiping. "Guess you'll be heading out soon." "I guess so," Marcus said. But something in his voice sounded uncertain, even to himself. She looked up. "You don't seem too eager." He hesitated. "I've spent years moving fast." "Maybe slowing down isn't such a bad thing." She smiled. "Careful. This town's contagious that way." He chuckled softly. "I'll take my chances." They stood there for a moment, silence stretching warm between them. Outside, the road glimmered under new sunlight, the storm washed clean. When he finally turned to leave, she followed him out to the door. "Hey," she said, reaching under the counter. "Don't forget this." She handed him the umbrella she'd lent him. The fabric was still damp, faintly smelling of rain and coffee. He took it slowly. "You sure you don't want it back?" "I'll see you again someday," she said lightly. "You can return it then." He gave a small smile. "You sound pretty sure." "I am," she said, eyes bright. "People who pass through here usually forget. But not you." Marcus opened his mouth, but no words came. Instead, he just nodded. "Goodbye, Emma." "Goodbye, stranger," she said, that same soft warmth in her tone. He walked out into the morning light, the umbrella hanging from his hand, his car gleaming down the road. As he got inside, he looked once more in the rearview mirror, at the small diner, at the woman who'd treated him like more than his money, more than his mistakes. The engine purred back to life. But something inside him stayed quiet, a silence that felt new and strangely welcome. Back in the city, everything was the same. Glass towers, deadlines, meetings, and the cold hum of success. But Marcus wasn't. His assistants noticed first, how he smiled more, how he asked about people's days, how he stopped checking his phone during lunch. He didn't talk about the diner. He didn't need to. Weeks went by, yet her face, her voice, stayed in his mind. Every late night in his penthouse, he'd look out at the skyline and remember that small, glowing place on the roadside where the coffee smelled like hope. Weeks passed quietly after Marcus's last visit. Emma tried not to notice the empty booth by the window where he used to sit. The place felt different without him, quieter, even when it was full. She told herself he was just another traveler, someone passing through like so many others before. But every time the bell above the door rang, her eyes lifted, hoping it was him. Winter came early that year. Business slowed, and the owner of the diner, old Mrs. Weller, grew ill. One morning, Emma overheard a conversation between the delivery man and the cook. The diner was going up for sale. She froze behind the counter, clutching the coffee pot. After closing, she sat alone in the dark booth, counting what she had saved, barely enough to cover rent for a few months. The thought of losing the diner broke her heart. It wasn't just a job, it was home. The smell of coffee, the faded red booths, the regulars who waved when she poured their drinks. This place was the rhythm of her life. She thought of Marcus again, of the way he listened when she talked about her dream of owning the place one day. He'd smiled then, saying softly, "You belong somewhere, that's yours." But people like him didn't stay. They had worlds to run and cities to rule. The next morning, she hung a small "for sale" sign on the window, her throat tight. Outside, snow drifted down like ash. Days later, a black car pulled up. Not the dusty pickup Marcus used. but a sleek sedan. A man in a gray coat stepped out, holding a briefcase. He came straight to the counter and asked, "Are you Emma Wells?" She nodded cautiously. He opened the case and slid a folder toward her. "The property has been purchased," he said. "The new owner asked me to bring you these." Emma stared at the papers. Her name was on the deed. The diner, her diner, was under her ownership. "There must be some mistake," she whispered, her hands trembling. "I could never afford this." The man smiled slightly. "Mr. Marcus Blake handled everything. He said you'd understand." Her heart stopped for a moment. She looked toward the door as if saying his name might bring him back. But he wasn't there. Only the quiet sound of the clock ticking above the counter. For hours after the lawyer left, she just sat in the booth where Marcus used to sit, staring at the snow outside. The diner was hers, but the one person she wanted to thank was gone. That evening, when she locked up, headlights appeared across the lot. A pickup truck rolled to a stop near the door. The driver stepped out slowly. Marcus. He looked different. No suit, no tie. Just that same flannel shirt and a tired, genuine smile. Emma stepped outside, her voice barely steady. "You bought it," she said. He nodded once, his breath fogging in the cold air. "It wasn't mine to buy," he said. "It was yours all along. I just made it official." She tried to speak, but her throat tightened. "Why?" Marcus looked past her, at the glowing diner sign flickering against the night sky. "Because the first time I walked in here, I was angry at everything. I thought my life was measured by numbers and deals. And then you brought me coffee, talked about sunsets and pie, and suddenly I remembered what it felt like to be alive." He looked at her then, his voice soft but certain. "You didn't teach me how to make money. You taught me how to breathe again." Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the lights behind him. "You didn't have to do all this." "I know," he said quietly. "But I wanted to invest in the only place that reminded me I was still human." The wind moved between them, cold but gentle. Snow gathered in her hair. Emma laughed softly through her tears. "You really are terrible at ordering pie and leaving things simple, aren't you?" Marcus smiled, the kind that reached his eyes for the first time in years. "Guess I needed an excuse to come back." They stood there in silence, the world around them quiet, except for the faint hum of the diner's neon sign. Finally, Emma opened the door and said, "Come inside. It's cold. I'll make you coffee." He followed her in. The diner looked different that night. Not newer, not grander, just alive. Steam rose from 2 cups as they sat across from each other in the booth. The radio hummed an old song neither of them knew, and the storm outside softened to a quiet snowfall. Emma leaned back, her hands wrapped around her cup. "So what happens now?" she asked. Marcus looked around. At the counter, the windows fogged with warmth, the quiet peace that filled the place. "Now," he said, "you run it, your way. And you?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "I'll just stop by sometimes." "For the pie," she laughed softly. "You'll pay double." "Deal." They both smiled, the kind of smile that carries years of unspoken understanding. Outside, the headlights dimmed, and the parking lot glowed faintly under the snow. The old "for sale" sign still leaned against the wall near the door, half buried in white. Emma glanced at it, then back at Marcus. "You really never planned on staying away, did you?" He looked down at his cup, then met her eyes again. "Maybe I was just waiting for a reason to stay." For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of the lights, the ticking clock, the sound of coffee being poured, all of it blended into something warm and still. When Emma finally looked outside, the snow had stopped. The clouds broke just enough to reveal a pale blue edge of dawn. Marcus turned slightly toward the window. "You know," he said softly, "I never believed people could change." Emma smiled faintly. "They don't always. But sometimes life just slows you down long enough to notice what matters." He looked at her for a long moment, really looked, then nodded. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Sometimes it takes a broken engine." She laughed through her tears, shaking her head. "And a bad cup of diner coffee." He raised his cup. To that, as the first light of morning spilled across the counter, Emma smiled, not because her dream had come true, but because for the first time, it felt real. And somewhere in that quiet moment, in the place where a billionaire once broke down and a waitress once offered kindness, they both found what they'd lost. Not wealth, not success, Just the simple, steady warmth of being human again.